So I want to start by saying, when I use HackMotion, one, I'm using it mostly for data collection, but also to sort of validate what I'm working on with my player and that is it moving in the right direction. So I always say, don't get caught up in the numbers because the calibration can be a little bit off. I'm more concerned with the direction that the movement is going. And as John Sinclair says, close the face early so you don't have to close it late. And what he's talking about there is what we found with all the 3D data out there that's been super helpful for my teaching is that the better players are moving that lead wrist towards extension. Doesn't mean they're all bow to the top. We got plenty of players that play from highly extended positions at the top to sort of neutral to flexed. They're all moving towards flexion early transition. And I think that's something that everybody should get a hold of and understand. And it really shows up when you start seeing the data and you start seeing it come to life. So I look at the graphs mostly. I don't pay as much attention to the numbers. I'm looking for graph shapes. I'm looking for direction, whether I'm looking at flexion extension or radial ulnar deviation. The curvature of the graphs, I think, tell me a lot about what the player's doing and what kind of pattern. And what you're going to see today with a couple of case studies is what I call the underload pattern. Scott Calix is called the underload pattern, which is a lot less radial deviation and a lot more flexion and ulnar deviation, which I think, especially for good players, is a really good pattern because it's my opinion is the most stable club face delivery position you can get. So for those of you that follow me on social know who this is. It's my son. And it was kind of cool looking at last year's presentation that I did and how different his golf swing is in just a year. We've done a ton of work over COVID. We've really used that time to our advantage, and it's really paid dividends. It's going to be great to see him play this spring. But you can see the graphs here. He was the first person I put the trail wrist HackMotion on. And it's interesting how you'll see basically with the flexion extension piece that they basically mirror one another. And you can almost, if you put this up here and say which one's lead and which one's trail, you'd probably have a little bit of a difficult time picking it out because they almost look the same, aside from the pronation supination graph, which Robbie's going to talk about why that is. At the bottom, you'll see the little double hump. But I'll go ahead and play the video here. This is his new swing. I mean, he used to be, because he was so tiny, he used to have a ton of left tilt and a ton of hip slide with his pelvis would slide to the right and his arms would lift, and he'd have just a super long backswing with a lot of radial deviation. He's one of the few players with flexible wrists where he can actually flex and also radial deviate at the same time. So with his grip type, which is very neutral, it matches up nicely with his club face. He's never played well with a real strong club face because his release type doesn't match up to it. The other thing, I'm going to play it one more time, that we figured out using HackMotion too, is how much he was pushing on the back of the shaft at like between 6 and 7. And you can see how his right elbow gets a little pitched at like 6.5. And I never noticed that because he always flushed it. But what we really noticed was when it showed up in his short game. So when he started trying to pitch the ball, then he would start tipping it out. The sweet spot would get outside the handle too much and you get a little bit steep. So we really worked on that with his short game. And we used HackMotion a lot to kind of just make sure that we were moving in the right direction. So here's my ex mini tour guy. Robbie's worked a little bit with him. I've worked with him. Really, really good player. He's like a +2 or +3, can flush it. But he was this guy that really wanted that lag look where he was kind of pulling down the handle, lead wrist would extend a ton. And I really talked to him about, hey, the new information shows that we really don't want to do that. And I used to teach that stuff 15 years ago, which I'm ashamed to say, but now that we understand, I want that basically underload feeling where he's flexing a lot, getting a stronger club face where he can keep that sweet spot back behind his hand path a little bit longer so he can use his body pivot, right? So he had a short pivot. I don't have his before. He had a very short pivot and he would lay the club off at the top, and then he would actually go into some flexion and extension with the right wrist. But then what happened is he'd tip it out coming down, so he'd have the crossover would happen way too soon, and he would kind of hit little wipey cuts or pulls. So man, we've got to get deeper with more rotation, and literally got to feel like the club is crossed up at the top with a little bit more motorcycle and early transition. Now he can actually use his pivot, and it looks more laggy, but he can lean the crap out of it now, and he's picked up a lot of distance, and he's hitting a nice little draw now. So I'll kind of play the video here so you can see. You can see the club is much more on line at the top now. Again, he's feeling like the thing is crossed up beyond belief, but it's not, right? So I'm still a big believer in freezers and slow motion drills to change patterns, and especially in when we're talking about backswing changes. So we'll see here where he's rehearsing. The top. That's what he's trying to feel. With the hands, there you go. Black, use the left arm. Beautiful. There you go. Love it. It's so good. I mean, it's just like crazy how much better he's hitting it. And he's actually getting more forward shaft lean, right? And you can see how this is just a super stable lead wrist. As you can see, he's barely extending to the top and then goes into sort of a gradual, you can see where the motorcycle happens here, just early downswing. And then he's leaning it plenty for a really, really good player. Now, this is one of the drills. Let me go back real quick. This is one of the drills that I like. Yeah, the one on the right. Do that drill again. And Robbie's going to demonstrate this here in a minute, but it's basically he's taking his right hand off of it and putting his index finger and his thumb on it very slightly. So it basically forces him to use his lead side and learn how that lead wrist starts to move towards flexion and early transition. All right, here's one of my college players. This is probably, I mean, one of the greatest success stories of my career. As this young man came to me 3 years ago, he was a high-level soccer player, really didn't play much golf, and just sort of got interested in the game and said, hey, I want to play college golf. Can you help me? So we did like a crash course for the last 3 years. I saw him probably twice a week on my annual program. And great athlete, which helped a ton. And this kid can absolutely move it. I mean, you'll see, and he got a scholarship late, his late junior year, early senior year to Wofford College, which was fantastic. So he's a freshman there this year. So again, you'll see and I've got the TrackMan numbers here as well, but I want to just give you a little preface. Very neutral grip-ish, not maybe like a 1.5 knuckle grip. Very underloaded pattern, which we didn't really try to get. It just sort of ended up that way. But I would say underload patterns work great for young, fast, high-speed players that can move, right? So this kid's pivot, we worked a lot on his lower body and his footwork, as you'll see. I'll just go and play the video here. But he has a super, super stable club face through impact, and we've switched to a fade pattern halfway through his junior year, and it absolutely just took his ball striking to another level. Kid moves at about 122 with the driver. I mean, absolutely just smashes it. So the biggest thing he struggles with is his wedges, right? So he leans the mess out of it. You'll see here when I get a face on view. But I like to look at, if you look at the graph, you can tell that even though he's leaning it, that trail wrist is moving hard into flexion for the trail wrist and pushing really hard against that lead wrist, which is good for him. Like if not, he'd never get the face square. So watch the downswing here. You'll see pretty good right there. And you can see I got both sensors on them. It's good to have both sensors. I can switch it back and forth from trail to lead. But really proud of this kid. He's come a long way, and he's really going to contribute to the kick and play. All right, moving on. So here's actually his teammate. Now I started working with this kid about 2.5, 3 years ago as well. He was a sophomore, he's now a senior. Another just unbelievable talent. Again, high driver speed, probably 122, 123. Came to me just this last lesson. This is like a couple of weeks ago. And again, it's like, what are you trying to achieve with your player, right? His swing, the shape of his golf swing was good. The pivot stuff was good. All the stuff we had worked on was good, but he was hinging a little bit more than he used to. He's trying to get a little longer backswing, so the face got a little bit more open. So then when he would shallow that thing out and get narrow, he couldn't square it up, and especially with the driver, right? The handle is going to start raising up, face is going to open even more, and he's just hitting block cities, right? So what I did with him, and you'll see in the rehearsals, again, feeling like he's really not setting his hands at all. Super unloaded, a little bit more flexion, but not a ton. Like again, if you add a little bit more ulnar deviation at the top, you don't have to flex as much, right? So it got his club face a lot more stable, and then he could really start to hit it more with his pivot and his body speed. So here is one that he sent me like a couple weeks ago before this last lesson. It's not the exact, but you can kind of get an idea. And again, you might look at this top of swing and think, this is okay, right? And again, if he was squaring it up, I would have been fine with it, but he was having a hard time squaring it up, so he had to stall his pivot, and he had to flip it at the bottom, right? He had a lot more flip, a lot more rotation than he wants, because he really wants to hit it more with his body. So here's what he's looking at. Like, you see how that's his feel. Again, obviously it's going to look a little bit different. You can see how much stronger the face is. And now we got the start direction where we're trying to get it, right? So now he's hitting a tight little draw. And it even worked with his driver. And what I was thinking about when I was working with him is how successful a guy like Butch Harmon is with drivers of the golf ball, right? So what's this doing to his circle? It's making it a lot wider, right? I mean, he's got beautiful shape, but now he's got a club face that's really, really stable, and he can square it up. And he can, again, I like my good players to feel like they're going to close it with their pivot, not have to do too much motorcycle with their hands. Anything to add there, Bob?
All good.
All good? All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Robbie, and he can kind of go through some of the stuff that we've been talking about. Because what we were discussing before, why I wanted him to come on, is he has a really good understanding of this stuff, but also how much it's not just wrist angles that's really controlling the face, it's also pronation, supination that's married with that.
That's right. So going along with Jason's first quote, and what we believe from John Sinclair, is that it's the motion, not the position. So I like to understand, really, maybe not from a number standpoint, but what's generally the motion that we're going to want to see from the lead wrist as well as the trail. So when you look at good golf ball strikers, for the most part, you're going to see pretty similar motions across the board. Lead forearm starting first, you're going to go a little bit palm down initially. As you get towards the top, you might go a little bit more towards supination.
You want to get a club?
Yeah.
We're gonna spread out the office here a little bit.
Right.
Make this a little bit more interactive.
Yeah. So if you can look at the graphs as I'm kind of demonstrating this, it will really help bring it to light. So taking a look at the lead forearm, like I said, definitely a little bit of pronation off the ball is fine, just to get it, somewhere with the center of mass in line with the hand path. As you start going to the top, you might see a little bit of supination, but through the top of the backswing, certainly when you're looking at these graphs, before the club changes direction, you're definitely going to see that lead forearm start to pronate. And then as it goes into the ball, again, you've got the force from the hand path going the one direction with the center of mass below it and behind it, like Monty just greatly described. Mm-hmm. And you're going to get definitely a whole bunch of supination with that lead forearm starting from about here, and it's going to continue supinating well into the follow through. So that little pronation, supination value with the lead forearm coming down is something that's going to really, when you look at the shape of the golf swing, is going to help get the center mass going down and back. And then as you're bending the hand path, definitely going to be a big club face closing assist when you get down to the bottom. Now that's only one side. The trail wrist is just as important, if not more important, in my opinion, because most of our golfers are right-handed. It's their dominant hand. It's what they can feel and sense more accurately in my experience. So as you go off the ball, again, kind of matching the lead form, you might get a little bit of supination early, but what I really enjoy seeing, if you can see where my orange ball is relative to my hands, is that definitely a little bit of pronation as you're approaching the top of the golf swing. So what that's doing is that's giving you momentum approaching the top where that club is going to want to go back down behind your hands. So through the top of the backswing, definitely seeing supination in the trail forearm. And this is the very unintuitive, but in my opinion, one of the most important moves that you can make in the golf swing is how that trail forearm continues to supinate well down into impact, nearing just before impact, before it then slams into pronation late.
Notice what the right wrist is doing, right? It's going into ulnar deviation, right?
Absolutely.
So that we're not lagging, we're not doing this coming down, right? We're actually throwing it back behind us
100%.
as we're starting to pivot.
And if you can look at the timings of the graphs, what you'll start to notice is something very interesting, is that at a certain point coming down, again, like I said, the lead forearm is going to start to supinate somewhere right around here, which is the same time the trail wrist continues to supinate. So if you look at my elbows, as I'm doing this, as I'm supinating the lead, I'm supinating the trail. It's actually getting the arms closer together, right? Even though you wouldn't think that they could do opposite things or pull on the grip in opposite
That's why you get
directions.
that little, that's why you get the little double hump,
That's
right?
right.
At the bottom. Let's see where my thing is, but yeah, the little double hump at the bottom is that sort of inverted.
Absolutely.
Why is it important the arms come together, right? What is the average player's doing? It's kind of like this, right?
That's right.
Call it the helicopter.
That's right. And that's just early pronation of the trail forearm. So when you can get people with a club, and we're going to get into drills a little bit later, with their right hand only, really getting them to feel that, okay, if you can get the center mass of the club a little bit above the hand path, again, you're getting some pronation in that forearm. If you're allowing the momentum to go to the other side of the hands and allow it to keep doing so, what you're going to get is in a position to where now I can rotate with my pivot and throw the handle around me as hard as I want, and this club's not going to get on the other side of the hands before you hit the ball.
Right. Which is why the club face being strong enough for the average player is so important, right?
But that dual, I haven't heard it much before, but the idea of both forearms supinating is something that your
gold right
chops need to understand that can happen.
Gold right there.